Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss how Reform UK are this week claiming that they're going to win the next general election based on a child's drawing. This is actually a step down from reading Crow's entrails, frankly, but it's worth looking at what exactly the current projection for the next general election might actually be, and as we can't read the future, what relevant factors could happen and how likely they are to happen. But first, for daily political commentary, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out. So first of all, I must showcase one of my favourite comments on the channel this week. Apparently, someone thinks this is an anti-reform channel. Can't imagine how they worked that one out. I thought I was being quite subtle. But anyway, let's have a look at this child's drawing that Reform UK are pinning their hopes on before looking at some more realistic analysis. So, Zia Yusuf, chair of Reform UK, presented this image as proof they can win the next general election. Now, before looking at what he says about it, what actually is this? Looks like a graph, doesn't it? Looks like a graph. It's not a graph, it's a drawing. It's a child's drawing, told you. Because it only has 2 data points on it. And actually, both of those data points are wrong. So the first data point is the number of seats they won at the general election against the vote share they got. And looking at where the line goes, that this child obviously drew, it's actually in the wrong place. The second is what they claim is their current polling. Now, where they've placed this is also at the upper end of all the polls, right? And it will be wrong anyway. Even the average will be wrong because pollsters have a habit of inflating Reform UK's voting intention score. In both the lead up and at the general election itself, although the top pollsters weren't far out, there were a couple of consistent errors. The first is that Labour's share was inflated a little. Everyone got Labour's share higher than it actually was. Now, we do know a lot of people switched their vote at the last minute. They were determined to get the Conservatives out, so would have voted Labour. But there were quite a lot, for example, who switched their vote to the Greens once they were assured Labour would win the election anyway. And as all the polls were conducted at least a couple of days before the election, in some cases a week before, that's not really a polling error. That is just an inability to catch genuinely changing votes in the last day or two. The second consistent error was an inflation in the Reform vote. This had also been the same for the past couple of years. So unless pollsters have somehow worked out what the problem is and fixed it, and I've not seen any of them say so, if you see a voting intention poll, it probably has Reform too high. The only pollster who don't inflate Reform UK are Ipsos, because they have very different methodology to the rest. But they haven't done a voting intention poll for ages, so, we can't really use them right now. But that's it. 2 data points, both of which they've actually somehow managed to put on the graph wrong. And yet Yusuf, or probably his young child, seems to have come up with a graph which isn't even a straight line. He's like, ooh. Like, how do you do that from 2 points? Also, he's claiming that there is a linear relationship between vote share and number of seats won. And it's like, well, that's only the case if we have proportional representation. And if we did have a PR system, it wouldn't be the case that 30% of the vote gets you a majority of seats, because that's like the opposite of PR, really, which is what Yusuf's kid is claiming here. The title of the drawing is, "We are now breaching the support level at which point the UK's first past the post system stops being a headwind and becomes a tailwind." Being clear, this is nonsense. First past the post works on the basis of winning more votes than anyone else in a majority of individual constituencies. There is no link, and there has never been any link, between vote share and number of seats won. This is why, when an election is looming, people commission MRP polls. They're more expensive, they take longer, that's why you don't get them between elections, but they are a more accurate way of doing it. Assuming you give the job to a credible pollster, that is, of course. So, electoral calculus has a tool. I will also say, electoral calculus don't ever read their polls. They're awful. But they do have a tool which crudely ties, vote share to seat share based on how different types of voters are distributed around the country. So it's not a complete guess. It is quite crude. I used it during the last Parliament. It's the only thing you've got, so I'll use it again. As always, remember, though, it is crude and nasty, and also voting intention years out from election is very different to how people vote in the election itself. But averaging out all of the current voting intention polls, which I have to do because neither YouGov nor Ipsos, the 2 really good ones, have done any voting intention polls for ages, So you average all those out, and what does it come out at? It says, well, Labour would win 288 seats, not a majority. The Lib Dems would win 70 seats. So you go, okay, so you end up with a Labour-Lib Dem coalition. Reform UK nowhere to be seen. You also get, out of interest, 191 seats for the Conservatives, 50 seats for Reform. Now, where this model will be wrong is in, if Reform UK can actually boost their share of the vote this high, it's inevitably going to be taking some Conservative votes from sort of the areas where the Lib Dems are in competition. So the Lib Dems would actually win more seats, not fewer. But the model is, as I say, crude. So based on current polling, Reform UK get 50 seats. To get up to the roughly 325 seats they need at a minimum, they'd need to do a lot better. And they'd need Labour and the Conservatives in particular to do a lot worse. So what are the factors that could make it happen? And, of course, what are the factors that could make it go the other way? So let's look at a few of them, shall we? First, Space Karen could actually give Reform UK this $100 million or £80 million. That's a lot of money. That's more money than was spent by all of the major parties at the general election this year put together. It would be a huge sum of money to flood into British politics, would inevitably be used by Reform to employ expert analysts and strategists, as well as to run targeted adverts. They would be outspending any other party, in fact, all the other parties put together. That inevitably would have an impact. I don't know how likely it is, because it would almost certainly be illegal, and it would be insane for the authorities to sit back and allow it to happen. And, you know, I'm fairly upset that Labour, although you keep seeing reports today going, Labour are talking about doing this, this and this. And it's like, yeah, in a couple of years, not now. But anyway, that would have an impact. Second, if Reform UK could win a decent haul of council seats in the local elections, they can start to build up an organised grassroots campaign, because they're currently missing that. By their own admission, they don't have that. But as Reform haven't been winning very many of the local by-elections which have been taking place since the election, I don't know how likely that is. It could be more likely. Like the problem is with a council by-election, it's not really in the news. So it's entirely based on your ground operation. They don't really have one. I suppose when you've got local elections, you've got lots of elections at once. It makes the mainstream media news. So it's in the national news. Reform UK get instant access to the national news whenever they want, to talk uncritically about whatever they want. So they could well do better in the local elections because of that national focus. We will see. We'll find out in May, because despite their whining, Labour aren't actually cancelling the elections. Third, Labour could fail to deliver the quality of life changes that they're currently pushing hard for. Seems very unlikely. Even if Labour remain as bad at communicating as they are now, which I hope they don't, it's very likely they will at least have some things to crow about in a few years' time. Like, even if they don't quite meet their lofty ambitions, we are going to have boosted the number of affordable housing. NHS waiting lists will be much lower. Pay should have grown in real terms for the first sustained period in like years. But of course, in theory, if Labour did fail to deliver standard of living improvements, yes, of course, that would boost Reform UK. However, if Labour succeed, then that swing to Reform UK will go back to Labour. Fourth, Labour could be blamed for continuing interest rates. You know, there are still people who fixed their mortgages before the huge hike from 2022. So there are still plenty of homeowners in line for a substantial increase in mortgage payments. Will they recognise that this is a fallout from the previous government, or just blame the current government in office? In terms of the way Labour have lost support with a series of unpopular budget policies, yeah, you could say if they continue doing that, that could carry on costing Labour votes as well. However, as all of these unpopular policies have essentially emerged from their reset budget, it's likely that they will dry up a little bit now. There are now fewer opportunities in the next few years to shit the bed like this. In fact, Labour could actually reverse a few of them. Some of them are expected. Like, they could adjust the inheritance tax rules to spare family farmers but clobber fake farmers harder without losing any money. So that is something I actually hope Rachel Reeves seriously considers. They will be easing pressures on households in poverty. Like the two-child cap isn't going now, but we know it's going to. There'll be other constraints as well at some point. So although this year's budget was unpopular to some key voters, future ones are much more likely to be a bit more crowd-pleasing. And because Trump is not going to do great things to the American economy, Farage claims about him could bite him on the arse before the next election. And all it takes from current polling is for Labour to just get 3 points back from Reform UK and 1 point back from the Greens, and they're back into hefty majority territory again. So although Reform are a threat to public perceptions on some policy areas and could be an electoral threat much further into the future, they're not going to be winning the election. Right now, the Conservatives are in disarray. Labour look like they're in disarray because of their messaging, and they've been doing the unpopular stuff early. They're open about that. They're doing the unpopular stuff early. And even now, the polling would suggest Reform, yeah, you might get 50 seats. And Labour would still form the government, albeit they would probably need the Lib Dems to do so. That's it. So you think in a few years' time where we start to get some of the benefits from Labour's policies right now. And it only has to go back a few points. So, Reform UK aren't winning anything, even if they draw a really pretty picture next time. Oh, and when Yusuf talks about the seat return curve, as if that justifies, oh, well, that's why he's done that curve, Phil. There's no such thing. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for listening. And until next time, I'll see you later.